Well, shalom, homies. How are you guys doing today? You know what? I've got a quick minute right now, and I just wanted to go over something that I've been endeavoring and studying for a little while now, which is, one of these little passages that you stumble on as you're doing your studies. For those of you that are not, man, I challenge you, get after it a little bit. There's some wild and fantastically interesting stuff that you find as you peruse through the scriptures. I don't know. Don't mind if you hear my wild children in the background. That's all good stuff. It's just vibrant. It's a tenacious, vibrant, intense life right now. Like we are. Excuse me. We are firmly deep in homeschooling, which is fantastic. For those of you that don't have children, or those of you that do, just something to consider. Homeschooling is a wild adventure. And you know what? We have been able to devote ourselves way more to that lately, which has been fruitful. Like really good. Laying down the rails, son. Laying down the rails on stuff. My wife sometimes will be doing a lesson and I'm like, what? I'm picking up pearls that I wouldn't have learned, Like if we continually export the education, the instructions of our children to others, we also miss out on like a second chance to learn valuable information and skills that we otherwise wouldn't. Like we just don't, because we got a lot of other stuff that we're like, we got a lot of other things to do. But with homeschooling, it's like, no, this is what you do. This is what you do. And you're going to learn a way of learning, teaching, instructing that otherwise you would have nothing to do with. You wouldn't ever volunteer. Generally, most people would not volunteer to go do this kind of stuff. But even like one section my wife's really big on is hygiene, cleanliness, and just turning down the bed in the morning, pulling back the covers, letting your bed breathe, opening up the windows, even if it's frigid cold. It's been fiercely cold. All these things are just these value gained skills that I did not have the same thing imparted to me early on. Not the same way, like not an understanding of what's going on with perspiration and what's trapped under your covers and how bed and fungus and mold and mildew and must, all these like funky, skunky things that happen in the bed. Like how to air that out, clean that out, how to hang your clothes up, fold them. Like you see these skills that are getting imparted into the children. You're like, wow, like these are beneficial things that could be fantastic for life. But I digress. That's something. So if you hear stuff going on in the background, y'all, I'm doing my best. It's, 14 degrees outside. And I'm like, let's just hit it from inside today. So bear with me. But I was reading in the book of Acts. If you haven't read the book of Acts, today I'm going to be reading from the Scriptures Translations, Institute for Scriptures Research. Some of you are going to ask me, be like, what is that? Where are you reading from? And I'm going to tell you. Stand fast. I'm getting cold. Now, the Institute for Scripture Research put this one out. There are so many different kinds of lessons that you can pick up along the way as you're reading through. Lately, my daughters and I, we've been doing a chapter. We've been doing 3 chapters at night. We're cruising through. And we were going through Joshua. We worked through Deuteronomy, went through Joshua, and I'm always hitting Samuel. Naomi's like, I hear these stories all the time, Dad. I'm like, yeah, because they're awesome. They're my favorites. And we hit Samuel constantly. And she's like, I remember this one. And as she's getting older, there's different things that she's picking up on. And she's starting to ask different questions than she normally, I don't know, at 5 years old, was just like neutral. Didn't even consider it. Didn't even think about it at all. But then as she's getting older, she's starting to pick up on things that are otherwise just strange. I mean, there's some strange little occurrences that take place inside the scriptures, and you're like, what is going on here? Like, there's a big section in there that as you're reading through, in the prophets in particular, where you're like, this is horrible. Like, this is brutal. I went through Jeremiah for a couple hours yesterday, 36. Man, let's just go there for a second, because this is awesome. This is savage. We're going to get to Acts 16. We're going to get to the spirit of Python. We're going to get to power and authority and dominion, little like battles that take place there. But Jeremiah has some incredible sections in it too. That's a massive book. Honestly, of any of the books that I did the audio scriptures of, that was one of the most challenging to do was the book of Jeremiah. It took me longer than felt to me longer than Psalms. It felt to me longer than most of the other ones. And I was like heavy and exhausted and like weary. I felt like I could just cry constantly with Jeremiah in a way I hadn't. And if there's something that happens when you read the word out loud, when you actually take your time to read the Bible out loud, as opposed to just reading it in your mind, it's different. It's different, and it impacts you different because there's suddenly this actual echo, and you're hearing it out loud as well as speaking it, and it's very profound. And you'll hear stuff, and you'll pick up stuff that you otherwise wouldn't even notice, and you'll find out There's strengths and weaknesses in all of us as readers and articulators. But in chapter 36, this is one of those sections where you're just like, what the stinking heck is going on here? This is savage, absolutely savage stuff that takes place here. Now, this is page 5. We're going to just zoom in for a second on Jeremiah. We're going to zoom in on chapter 36. Now, in the timeline of history, you're going back to the days of Babylon being the preeminent powerhouse in all of the world, right? There's massive archaeological evidences about this time. Nebuchadnezzar is considered in a lot of circles as the center point for being able to identify timelines in what it would be called ancient history. And so Nebuchadnezzar has so much evidence about his life and his time frame, and they're able to circumnavigate from there a lot of prehistory timeframes surrounding him. So there's a big epoch of studies all around Nebuchadnezzar, and that's because we have a lot of like the reliefs, stone, not carvings the same way, but where everything pops out at you like a 3D picture. It's pretty savage stuff. Anyways, they have 3D pictures, these reliefs from this moment of time of what takes place when Jerusalem gets sacked, destroyed. When the king gets brought in for judgment in front of Nebuchadnezzar. Like wild and crazy stuff that takes place here. Anyways, Jeremiah is a guy who lives through a lot of different kings. His story, as you're reading it, as you're understanding what he's talking about, he lives through the course of a lot of different people's lives. And because of that, he's prophesying and he is giving witnesses and instructions to different kings at different times throughout his ministry. So when you read Jeremiah, you got to keep the context in mind as you go through it. But right here is kind of the apex of it. It's all building to this moment. We're 36 chapters into this, and he has been warning the people about what's coming, been warning the people about turning away from their wickedness, turning back to the ways of the Most High, abandoning and forsaking the ways of the world. In predominant focus, too, is dealing with the idolatry that's so rampant in Israel at the time. And it's just taken over in Yehuda. And it has gotten to such an extent where the kings themselves are now leading the people are leading the kings and pressing on the kings to sin and to walk in this path of wickedness. Whereas in the house of Israel, which is the 10 other tribes really, those people were being forced to sin, led to sin, coerced to sin, rewarded to sin, and into idolatry and adultery, spiritual adultery with the Most High, with all these other mighty ones by their king. The king was kind of top down influencing everyone like that. Whereas even today, in our country, we are living in a time where it is being incentivized and cultivated to forsake the path of righteousness, really for the past 70, 80 years in particular, that stirring up and forsaking the path of righteousness, the scriptures, to make this a mock, something that people mock and scorn and belittle. But you see, even as you've shifted morality so far to such an extreme that people are getting to a stage where they're literally recognizing this is futility, this is vanity, this is the chasing of the wind. We can't live our life like this because of the fruit that comes out of it is absolutely confusion. Confusion at every turn, complete loss of understanding of identity. And as that takes place, it gives people despair. The fruits of it are often despair and hopelessness, meaningless. They don't have any purpose for their life. But Jeremiah is prophesying, and he's trying to call the people back towards the narrow path, trying to call the people towards repentance, towards obedience, towards loving their Father in heaven with all their heart, their mind, their soul, their strength, and loving their neighbors as themselves. Like Yeshua said, that is the summary of that was the culmination of the Torah, the prophets, and the writings. This is literally the culmination of it all. Is you love Yahuwah with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, with all your strength, and you love your neighbor as yourself. This is what the entirety of the scriptures was there to bring to people, to focus in on. Now, Jeremiah is going through an insane season because he is being persecuted heavily because the stuff he's writing about, the stuff he's speaking about is being censored. Literally, we're going to read about censorship right now and the abdication of free speech. Why people don't like hearing certain things, and people that are in power shut it down and tear it down. Now, at this time, they had a different methodology to do that. So we're going to zoom in on his because it resonated with me today. And it came to be in the 4th year of Jehoiakim, the son of Yoshiyahu, sovereign of Yehuda, that's the house of Judah, that this word came to Jeremiah, from Yahuwah, saying, take a scroll and write on it all the words that I've spoken to you against Israel and against Yehuda and against all the nations from the day I spoke to you, from the days of Yoshiyahu, even to this day. It could be that the house of Yehuda hears all the evil which I plan to bring upon them, so that each one turns back from his evil way, and I shall pardon their crookedness and their sin. So that was the intent. The intent is that they would hear the words read, or they would read the words for themselves, and they would turn back from their evil ways, and I would pardon their crookedness and their sins. This is him extending an offer. Once more, turn, repent, confess your sins, turn, and leave them behind. He's offering this to the people. So Yirmiyahu called Baruch, the son of Neriah, and Baruch wrote on a scroll from the mouth of Yirmiyahu all the words which Yahweh had spoken to him. And Yirmiyahu commanded Baruch, saying, I am shut up. I'm unable to enter the house of Yahuwah. But you shall enter and shall read from the scroll which you have written from my mouth the words of Yahuwah in the hearing of the people in the house of Yahuwah on the day of fasting, and also read them in the hearing of all Yehuda who came from their cities. It could be that they present their supplication before Yahuwah, and they turn back, each one from his evil way. For great is the displeasure and the wrath that Yahuwah has spoken against his people. So Jeremiah is literally living in a place where he cannot enter the house of Yahuwah. He can't even go there to give to the people the word itself. And so he's sending Baruch. Baruch is actually the one who is Jeremiah's scribe through the entirety of this book, and others as well. Baruch writes some very, very important books that are left out of most of our scriptures. Baruch is an amazing, incredible penmanship author, amazing author. And he has his own independent works, whereas the ones of Jeremiah, these are the ones that he's now representing as the mouthpiece for Yirmiyahu. And Baruch, the son of Neriah, did according to all that Yirmiyahu the prophet commanded him, reading from the book of the words of Yahuwah in the house of Yahuwah. And it came to be in the 5th year of Jehoiakim, the son of Yoshiyahu, sovereign of Yehuda, in the 9th new moon, that they called a fast before Yahuwah to all the people in Jerusalem and to all the people who came from the cities of Yehuda to Jerusalem. And Baruch read from the book of the words of Yirmiyahu in the house of Yahuwah, in the room of Jeremiah, son of Shaphan, the scribe, in the upper courtyard at the entry of the new gate of the house of Yahuwah, in the hearing of all the people. And Mikiyahu, the son of Jeremiah, son of Shaphan, heard all the words of Yahuwah from the book. And then he went down to the sovereign's house, into the scribe's room, and all the heads were sitting, Elshama the scribe, Deliyahu the son of Shokaniah, Elnathan the son of Akbor, Jeremiah son of Shaphan, and Zedekiah son of Hananiah, and all the heads. And Mikiyahu told them all the words which he heard when Baruch read the book in the hearing of the people. Then all the heads sent Yahudi, the son of Nethanyahu, son of Shemaliyahu, son of Cushi, to Baruch, saying, Take in your hand the scroll from which you have read in the hearing of the people, and come. So Baruch, the son of Neriah, took the scroll in his hand and came to them. And they said to him, Sit down, read it in our hearing. Then Baruch read it in their hearing. And it came to be, when they had heard all the words, that they looked at each other in fear, and said to Baruch, We are certainly going to report all these words to the sovereign. And they asked Baruch, saying, Please explain to us, how did you write all these words? From his mouth? And they asked Baruch, saying, and Baruch answered them, saying, From his mouth he spoke all these words to me, and I wrote them with ink in the book. Then the head said to Baruch, Go, hide you and Yirmiyahu, and let no one know where you are. Do you understand? These words have caused such fear to come over the people, because on one side, you're going to see two main camps that will split off when they hear the word predominantly. There's people that in this time are fearful of the words being shared out to the masses. They do not want this message to go abroad. And they're terrified that the words of Yirmiyahu are going to be spread out to the masses, and they're going to infect the people with what they believe is the destruction of their nation. Baruch is literally telling the people, or through Jeremiah's words, what's going to come to pass. Nebuchadnezzar is going to come here. He's going to take the city captive, and all of you are supposed to submit to him. And that is not the resistance message that they want their soldiers, nor do they want any of the people of the area to believe. And so he's trying to call them back to repentance so they can forsake this punishment that's coming upon them and have it abdicated away from them. But during that midst, in that inner season, they've got some major changes that have to be made. The other camp is recognizing the fear of Yahuwah from these words and wants to turn, wants to repent, wants to follow the instructions that are coming from them. However, there's this war. And unfortunately, you have in the priest class many people who do not want the status quo getting changed. They're the ones who have the power to bring forth the messages to the people. They don't want that going out. They're like kind of big tech of their day. You know, they have the capacity to be able to make a message go viral. They have the ability to spread it out to the nations in a very rapid rate. They don't want to do that. Their goal is to censor that content. And so you're going to see how they go about doing that. It's vicious, bro. And so they're literally telling Baruch and Jeremiah, they're like, bros, go into hiding. Go hide yourselves. Don't tell anyone where you're going because they're probably going to want to kill you after this. You know, typical. And they went to the sovereign into the court, but they put the scroll in the room of Elishama, the scribe, and told all the words in the hearing of the sovereign. And the sovereign therefore sent Yahudi to bring the scroll, and he took it from the room of Elishama, the scribe. And Yahudi read it in the hearing of the sovereign, in the hearing of all the heads standing beside the sovereign. And the sovereign was sitting in the winter house in the 9th new moon with a fire burning on the hearth before him. Then it came to be, when Yahudi had read 3 or 4 columns, that the sovereign would cut it with the scribe's knife and threw it into the fire that was on the hearth, until the entire scroll was burned in the fire that was on the hearth. Yet the sovereign and all his servants, who heard all these words, were not afraid, nor did they tear their garments. Moreover, Elnathan and Eliyahu and Jeremiah pleaded with the sovereign not to burn the scroll, but he did not listen to them. And the sovereign commanded Jeremiah, son of the sovereign, and Sariah, son of Azriel, and Shemaliahu, son of Abdiel, to seize Baruch the scribe and Jeremiah the prophet. But Yahuwah had hid them. Can I just say what a crushing, frustrating moment was? The first time I ever heard this, I was devastated when I actually understood it because of the time and the investment and the commitment to write out the entirety of this book, to speak this out. This is such a laborious process. And here it is. The king is not afraid from these words. If anything, the response that is in him is this hardening off and this searing up of this. And this is what you'll experience at times when you try to bring people the gospel of the kingdom, when you try to explain to them that there's a supernatural world out there, that it's not all just materialistic. It's not all just what you can see and smell and touch and taste, that there's more. There's a non-material world out there that's far more relevant, that has a greater impact in our life than what we're given by the sciences of the day, that there's exceedingly more going on in our reality than what we can physically see. When you try to bring that message to them, when you start to try to explain to them and reason with them about the circumstances of their life and what has led them there and these influential factors that are taking place in them, that there's power in reading the word, there's power in prayer, there's power in intercession and mercy and forgiveness, that there's power in believing in the Son, Yeshua, the Messiah. There's power in his name and his authority. When you try to explain these, you will experience some that harden it off and they physically want to respond with violence. They want to physically rip this apart because they think if they can get rid of this, it will make all of that go away. But that methodology where he's taking like a scribe's knife, he's taking this little scribe's knife and he's just slicing it out and he's throwing those things away and he's trying to burn and blot out this word. But let me tell you, there's this very interesting reality of what happens when this book gets targeted, when this book gets, targeted for deletion, censorship. When people get persecuted, that are really zealous about their faith, it grows. It cultivates it all the more so. You'll see a galvanizing effect in them. They will be insulated from the attack, if anything, and it will prompt them to be more zealous about their beliefs and their convictions. And this is what I love to see. For any of you that are dealing with the censorship side of the equation in your life, where people are trying to shut you up and make you silent and not talk about this stuff and discourage you and try to stomp you into oblivion, please remember, you're not the first person who has dealt with that tactic of the enemy. That enemy is very effective at getting us to keep our mouths shut, at getting us to not be bold, at extinguishing the fire of courage that is in us. And he is very good at it. He's a very capable adversary in that regard, and discouraging people and taking from them their desire to do rightly, to do something that's good. I don't know if any of you have ever had that kind of still small voice in you that's giving you an idea about doing something to bless somebody else or to look after somebody else or to help somebody else. But there's always a lot of counterattack that can come in and try to steal that away. But you know what? Be quick to do it. Be quick to respond to that. Be quick to obey that, because it can literally be something so inconsequential, something that is very small and minute to you. But to somebody else, it could be an absolute answer to prayer in a unique way. I'm going to share a little tiny example of that with a knife, because it's like that for me. My life comes down to the way of the blade. You know what I'm saying? For some reason, it's up there. I don't know. That's all right. Who knows? Maybe I'm looking at the wrong spot. I apologize, y'all. Hang in there. Anyways, this. Let me show you this thing. Look at that. Oh, let's see. Boom. The Spartan. Any of you ever seen this before? This is a cold steel Spartan. Yes. It is a massive, reasonably massive. In the world of big blades, this is a pretty big one. They've got some super exceedingly long ones. I have one of those. But this is the cold steel Spartan. This has a recurve edge on it. I got to do a whole episode just on recurves, because they have this unbelievable cutting power. You know, this tiny little blade seems to some gigantic. But this pulls material up into this surface as it cuts. So it increases the cutting power, almost like as a slicer predominantly. You know, when you're slicing through that apple, just effortless, relentless, incredible effectiveness on it. Anyways, it has this great handle. This is a very reminiscent of a knife style, of a blade style that's called a Machaira. The Machaira. Basically, the Greek word that we get in Ephesians 6 when it says we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, powers, rulers, dominions, authorities, spiritual wickedness in high places. And it talks about take up the armor of Yahuwah, helmet of salvation, the shield of faith, breastplate of righteousness, belt of truth, feet shod with the preparation of the gospel of peace, shalom, and bearing up the sword of the Spirit. That sword is literally Machaira, and it's similar in style to this, where you have this big handle space and a hand guard so that it'll help to lock it into your hand. And then when you thrust or when you make a slash, you have some protection. A lot of those other ones actually had like a full protective guard that went over here. Anyways, this is put out by Cold Steel, and this is like a miniature version of that, and it's fantastic. It also has a feature, two main features. This is their tri-axis lock. You non-knife people are like, whatever. This thing is robust, okay? These lockbacks make a big deal, because a lot of the lockbacks can be kind of weak a little bit. Well, Cold Steel has the tri-axis, and it's insane. You can stab this into a tree and hang upside down off of it. It's robust. It's robust. And then it also has this pocket opener here. Another style is called the Emerson Wave Opener. But this thing allows it to sit inside your pocket. Whoop. And then when you go to draw it up out of your pocket, this will snag on the outer part of your pocket there and open it up and deploy the blade. So you can just pull it out and it's open and ready to rock. Anyways, it's fantastic. 4 years ago, I bought this knife. And I was like, oh, I love that knife. It's so awesome. It's so great. I didn't carry it all the time. I did when I was doing more shepherding and stuff. This was back in the land of the goats, and I was doing a lot more shepherding, and I was using it a lot more there because I was also chopping little pieces of bamboo occasionally and throughout my day. And so I was like, I don't want to always carry the big machete. I didn't always need the big machete, but I carried this around, and it would work well enough as a little chopper for me to process bamboo. And I was making a lot of tomato steaks. I was staking and weaving tomatoes at the time. But I really loved that knife. But then it just sat in my drawer, and I didn't use it all that often. And I met a man who was a mighty, ferocious man of Yahuwah. And I was like, you know what? In my world, how I say, I honor you. I respect you. Respect, son. You give another warrior a blade. That's like a way of being like, mad respect to you. And this man had massive hands. And his hands filled this thing up like perfectly. And I saw him holding it. And I was like, oh, yeah, that knife should be for you, bro. And I was like, you know what? I believe that man should have that knife. And I was like, felt it churning in my spirit. I was like, you should give him that knife. And I was like, I really like that knife. I don't want to. My son can hear me, and he's like, Dad's right on the other side of that door. Sweet guy. Sometimes that's how I feel when you give your favorite knife away. Just want to do that on the inside. Hang in there. He'll be all right. He'll be all right. He's slumping down on the other side of the door. It's going to be okay. I'm going to keep going. I'm going to try to just keep going. I love that guy. By the way, my children are rocking. The twins are great. It's getting better. They're a lot more fun. There's a lot more going on with them. Like, it's fantastic. I couldn't be more grateful for my children. I've been more grateful for my children in the last, 4 or 5 weeks than I have in my entire life. It's a terrible thing to say, but it's true. I'm genuinely far more exceedingly grateful. I'm just enjoying them. Like, every minute, I feel like it's just a gift like I don't deserve and can't even imagine that I've been entrusted with this. I've got like a big family. It's a miracle. Chelsea and I were watching videos. We've been working on this RV recap. I'll get back to the knife. Just hang in there. We've been working on this RV recap, like our story of like lessons learned on the road, our best pieces of advice that we have for like other people that are wanting to do that or are doing that right now. There's a lot of people out here in North Carolina that are living in RVs and travel trailers and right now, because that's it. Home's gone and they got tents and pop-ups and all kinds of stuff. We've lived in that lifestyle. But as we were going through that, we were watching a lot of the videos from the end of that season where Chelsea got super sick with all of the mold toxicity and all the liver damage. And I mean, it was awful to see that again and brutal to realize how close she was to death's door. I mean, she was begging to die in its own way because she was suffering so horrifically from all of the cholestasis and all these other things that were just ripping her apart. And her body was shutting down on her. She was in so much agony. She was exhausted, perpetually exhausted in a very different way. But into that season, we literally got to see miracle, an absolute miracle, go from 1 baby to 2 unknowingly. We did not know we were going to have those twins until I caught my son in a copper bowl. I mean, just wild moment. We have a video, if you guys haven't seen it, it's called Deliverance Has Come, which is all about our birth story. It's ridiculous. Home birth, crazy moment. We didn't do midwives and all that other stuff before then, but it was a unbelievable experience. One of the greatest experiences, one of the most trying seasons of our entire life, and what an unbelievable refinement. And we feel like we were just kind of in it perpetually, just pure survival mode for a long time, till we could finally get to a place where we're like, we are actually just enjoying our family, enjoying life, and just enjoying, deliberately choosing to enjoy these moments, even though they're wildly adventurous, even though they're climbing and getting into all kinds of stuff, even though they're doing all these things that are just absolutely ridiculous, trying to just choose as an act of my will to be thankful only for them and to not grumble and complain for any of it. We're getting a lot better, setting some big rules in our house about that to try to help keep each other accountable. It's been so much better. Anyways, just want to share that for what it's worth. Those of you that have children, you understand what I'm talking about. There's different phases that are wretchedly difficult, and then there's others that are wonderful. And you know what? I'm just trying to soak it all in because who knows how long we all have. Drink it deep, when you got it available to you. But back to the cold steel Spartan. Anyways, I gave this knife away to someone, and there was definitely quite a few times over the last couple of years where I was mourning that, where I was grieving that. I was like, man, I really miss that knife. It would be great right now. It's a fantastic chopper, and I missed it. And I remember praying literally randomly. One day I was like, you know what, Father? If you want to ever give me that knife back, I know you will. And I know you have the power to do that. And you know what? Like a month and a half ago, maybe 2 months ago, I opened up a box in the mail, and this was in it. And it came from somebody totally different who knows nothing about this entire thing. I don't think I've ever even maybe shown that knife. I don't even know that I have. But I it dropped me to my knees and darn near broke me with an understanding that the Father, even in these like minute little prayers of something that's seemingly small and inconsequential, like he actually hears us and listens to us and has the power to take, when we ask for something like in secret, he says, go into the secret place when you pray. He's like, make your requests known to me. He's like, I know what you need, but talk to me about it. Come to me. Make your requests known to me, and I'll answer you. There's a protocol for getting your needs met in his kingdom. And that's my perspective, at least, that's been our approach even in our ministry, is we make our needs known to him in quiet places, you know, and if he ever stirs it up on other people's hearts to answer that or to meet us or to reach out to us, to ask us what we need and that kind of stuff, we've answered, but we like to do it in secret. Because then when the miracle comes in and you get to write out that testimony about how he answered a prayer, how he answered you in a way that you really needed it, oh, it's so powerful. Because it takes an otherwise maybe invisible relationship and helps it to be far more tangible to you. It helps it to have some substance there. And this is where there's such power in prayer. There's so much power in gratitude and in thanking the Father and in identifying the small little things in our life that can make a difference. And for me, it was a blade. For me, it was a blade that answered that prayer and helped to remind me that I felt like it's confirmation that I'm on the right track, that the Father is answering me like, keep going. I got you. But that could have come years ago, but it never did. It came at the exact right time when I needed it to be reminded of that. You know, and there's some of you are going through some stuff right now. And you know what? I just want to encourage you, pray, seek the Father, petition him, pray the impossible prayers, because nothing is impossible with him. Nothing is impossible to them who believe. And I want you to know that. I want you to remember that and put that at the forefront of your mind, no matter what's going on in your circumstances. Don't be afraid to pray those prayers. On the outside surface, everything was lining up for my wife to end up hospitalized and likely dead from the giving birth to those children. And you know what? We prayed and we sought the Father diligently for days and days about whether we should go to the hospital. Do we need to be there? She's so weak. She's so emaciated. She's struggling so bad. Like, are we fools? And you know what? Every time we prayed about it, her and I both independently would get the same answer, that we are supposed to trust him in it and we are supposed to stay, that he would take care of us. And he answered us and showed himself to be faithful, showed himself to be trustworthy in that regard. And listen, even if it had turned out differently, he still would have been faithful. He still would have been trustworthy. We need to have a layer of our faith and our conviction so that when we experience loss, persecution, people going after us and destroying the very thing that we have been laboring towards, blotting it out, eradicating it, you know, taking from, like right now, especially in my world where I live in a lot of the YouTube and the social media world, so many of the other content creators and people that I interact with are watching their content, things they've labored for and worked for months or years of their life, being snuffed out, being completely obfuscated out of society. And it's devastating, and it's very, very discouraging, and it's easy to want to quit and give up. And I've had a fair share of that, where mine gets taken down. Some of mine that I put up, one that I had labored on for almost 50 hours of editing, got nuked during the premiere. You know, that was so frustrating. And it was over hybrids. Stinking hybrids, y'all. Preaching the gospel to hybrids. And you're like, what the heck? I'm reading from the Bible about a section in the Bible. And they're like, oh, yeah, misinformation. I'm like, are you saying the Bible? It's a problem. Understand, though. Got to gird up and not let that stuff discourage us. It discouraged me for a while. It stinking sucked the wind right out of me. And I'm like, this is ridiculous. This is so frustrating. But you know what? I'm starting to remember, Ed, and in all these circumstances, understand that we need to adapt and overcome. That's ultimately what we need to do. No matter what persecution comes our way, we need to adapt and overcome that. Chelsea had a real heart-to-heart with me about it the other day and was like, listen, you need to just do it regardless of what comes from it. At the end of the day, if we're faithful to sow out the word, it will never return void. We challenge people to memorize the scripture. We've been able to send out so many knives to people all over who are going through all kinds of different circumstances that I otherwise would have no idea about. I would never know to pray for these people about their circumstances. I would never know to be praying for somebody who's dealing with fits of absolute rage, or somebody else who's dealing with bouts of unbelievable crushing depression, others who are grieving for the loss of their son who was murdered. I have so many different things that I now get to hear about and intercede for that I otherwise would know nothing about. And so on the other side of it, I need to be perpetually grateful for any chance that I have to be able to minister to people through any form of technology while it's available to us. We don't know how long we have to be able to utilize these platforms and these technologies, but while we have it, what a gift. What a gift that we can administer love and compassion and truth to others, where we can talk to them about the authority of Yeshua to cast off demons, to deliver them from oppression. You know, I've been in the very strange, people don't know what to do with like ritual abuse survivors in a lot of ways in their testimonies, or people that come from these occult bloodlines or sorcery and magic and all this stuff. So they get shoved in kind of the paranormal world. They're like, I don't know what to do with that guy's story. Like, shove them around with all those people that talk about aliens and Bigfoots and all that other, just shove them in that corner of society. So I've been around and interacted with people that have gone through some very brutal, hard to articulate things, whether it's UFO experiences, abductions, any of that kind of stuff. Do you need something? No. Okay. Can we close that? Yes. Thanks. I've been around a lot of people that have gone through those kinds of experiences over the years, and in the community, just for instance, let's talk about UFOs and abductions for a moment, shall we? Because why not? Some of you are like, what in the world is going on? Others like, yes, finally. That's all I've been wanting to hear today. In the abductee phenomenon, if you guys aren't as much familiar with it, some of you are. They're trying to transition, in our country, they're trying to transition people to accept the UFO experiences and those kinds of situations by translating it into a different word called UAP, unidentified aerial phenomenon, something like that. They're trying to change the word because for so long our government's been like, there's no such thing as UFOs. There is nothing there. There's nothing to concern yourself with. It's basically just a bunch of smoke and mirrors, propaganda-wise. So now they're like, okay, we want to reintroduce it to the public, and we want people to take us seriously, that we're the source of the authority, that they can trust us. So let's reintroduce it as UAPs. Sounds good? Okay, it's 3 letters. They could probably figure it out. It starts with U. They can get there. So anyways, that's where a lot of it's been going. So there's a conflagration of different misinformation and information coming out today about that. But a big portion of the actual reality on the ground with people who deal with UFO experiences is abductions, which lay a lot of similarities between sleep paralysis and the terror of the night, and which you'll find in Psalm 91. This is why previously and other times when I've discussed this with y'all, I talk about the scriptures as having this power to cast out demonic oppression. And that literally the words of the scriptures have the ability, spoken in faith and in belief, to change the spiritual atmosphere, the physical atmosphere of the room, and to deliver people from strongholds of oppression that are going on in their life. Well, within the UFO community, though, that idea is not really facilitated much. And inside that world, abductees and people that are experiencing this feeling of being paralyzed in their bed, having windows sometimes open, sometimes not, and then being taken out of their house, their apartment, their room, and being taken on to craft and having experiments done on them, or being terrorized, being given messages, being told that they're these chosen ones who have to bring forth this message. There's a lot of variations to individuals' experiences, but there's some common thematic elements that are pertaining to it. Never are you going to find any of those deities representing Yeshua Mashiach, Jesus Christ, whatsoever. None of them have anything to do with that. If any of them, none of them are validating or discussing any aspects of the scripture in that regard. However, they tend to have what would be much more akin to unifying planetary messages, which you'll find a lot more akin to things that you'll see in Aleister Crowley and Helena Blavatsky's, and a lot of the mixings between the New Age. You'll see a lot of that greening agendas being mixed in and layered in there to what it is that these aliens say. This is the message I'm sending you back as my ambassador to give back to people. Anyways, amidst that community, though, some of these people are utterly terrorized by these experiences, tormented by them, and they cannot get them to stop. And in that world, they literally do not believe there's any way you can physically stop abduction experiences, that there's nothing you can do to stop it. However, inside their own literature, researchers who sit there and talk with the abductees and they write down their experiences and their encounters. There's a big organization called MUFON, which spends a lot of time and money investigating this. And they put together and collaborate on what are the common elements that they're finding. However, what's hidden in that data and what's been obfuscated and not discussed readily amongst the researchers who have their own little groups is how it was stopped. There's times that it was stopped, and you'll find consistently the things that stopped it were people reading the scriptures, saying the word out loud, singing hymns, calling on Jesus to save them. And it will stop these events. It will stop these experiences in a moment, in an absolute moment. But the fear of men, the fear of reprisals, the fear of losing their platform, their status, their reputation in their community keeps them from bringing that information forward. And this isn't just limited to like the UFO community. You will find the same principle as taking place in academia and people that are doing research, hard science research, that will find things that corroborate the scriptures or identify validity towards the scriptures. And and in our country, it is absolutely persecuted for people to present or bring forth that information. It's been the mocking stock of our society. It's been okay to mock the Bible, and anything that tries to point away from it has been good and reputable. But anything that endorses it or lends credence to it, no, that's something that we don't talk about here. It's not what we talk about in here. With one of my students, my clients that was dealing with constant alien abduction stuff in the house at this sober living community we were at, he was constantly being tormented by it. I had him read Psalm 91 out loud at night, and it stopped it. It stopped it. Every night that he had that happen and he read Psalm 91, it did not happen. It would completely stop the event for him. That was an unbelievable witness to him. But I was persecuted by my employers for doing that. But that's a common theme that you'll experience. It's a very deliberate deception. And you have people who do not want the truth to get out there because that's the cure. And as long as you have symptom management available to people and you can keep dishing that out, you've got repeat customers. But if you give people the actual cure, their business dries up. It's why there's always the race for the cure and never the finish line. And here is the actual cure. How many hundreds of billions of dollars are we going to sink into unfruitful events, unfruitful research? Well, as much as we can possibly keep sinking into that, because it's very advantageous and profitable for shareholders to be able to have access to that kind of money. So we have a culture that's been built up to disincentivize people's testimonies when they are actually finding the reliability of the biblical life. So I just say that to those of you that are dealing with it and suffering persecution or finding the truth in the scriptures, and you want to tell people about it. Understand this has been going on from the beginning. There's hierarchical rulers who don't want anybody to have access to the cure, and so they want to stomp it into oblivion. And that's why I try to challenge y'all: store it up in your heart, memorize the scripture. Memorize the scripture. I gave people a challenge: memorize a chapter of the scripture. Send me a video of you doing it, and I'll send you a knife, because I want you to learn the hard work and the fruit that comes from learning the word. It'll change you. You won't think about it as much, but once you do, it changes you completely, and you start to have a totally different idea about the way that the world actually functions and what governs it, and it starts to be there for you. In the mornings, the girls start out saying their memory verses, and it's getting longer and longer as they're saying more and more of them. We read an email from a couple that were memorizing a verse a day, just one verse every day, and they're adding to it and adding to it and adding to it, chapters and chapters. And you're like, this is beautiful. This is beautiful. This is making people disciplined, making us disciplined. And you know what? We need to be those disciplined people who have the actual disciplines of righteous men and women, because it's profound what your impact is when you're equipped with this armor, when you actually have the sword with you on your heart, ready to give an answer to people, and you're well equipped. It's a major difference between the guy who has a knife and the people that don't. You know it. Some of you that like to be that guy, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You're like, oh, does somebody need a knife? Yes, I'll be there for you. You know, like, it's an amazing experience. You got to know it. You got to know it. It feels so good when you satisfyingly hand somebody a knife who desperately needed one. But not having the word stored up in your heart, you don't have anything to give. You can't dispense that out. I'm going to jump back in. We're going to go back to Yirmiyahu for a moment, and then we're going to skip over to the book of Acts. We're going to skip over to see someone else who's having one of those shaky moments. Let's hear what happens here. Because think about this. Jeremiah has every excuse to be like, dadgummit, he burned the scroll. It's over. I'm not going to bother. Why bother saying it again? Why bother writing it down again? Why bother re-editing the video and posting it again? Why bother? The discouragement could have been there, but check this out. The word of Yahuwah comes to him. And after the sovereign had burned the scroll with the words which Baruch had written from the mouth of Yirmiyahu, the word of Yahuwah came to Yirmiyahu, saying, take another scroll and write on it all the former words that were in the first scroll, which Jehoiakim, the sovereign of Yehuda, had burned. And say to Jehoiakim, the sovereign of Yehuda, thus said Yahuwah, you've burned this scroll, saying, why have you written in it all that the sovereign of Babel is certainly coming to destroy this land and cause man and beast to cease from here? Therefore, thus said Yahuwah concerning Jehoiakim, sovereign of Yehuda, he shall have no one to sit on the throne of David, and his dead body is to be thrown out to the heat of the day and the frost of the night. And I shall punish him and his seed and his servants for their crookedness. And I shall bring on them and on the inhabitants of Jerusalem and on the men of Yehuda all the evil that I have spoken against them. But they did not listen. So Yirmiyahu took another scroll and gave it to Baruch, and wrote on it from the mouth of Yirmiyahu all the words of the book which Jehoiakim, sovereign of Yehuda, had burned with fire, and many similar words were added to them. Come on now. There's some major consequences for that censorship. I'm just saying, it's an inevitability that sooner or later that censorship loses. You can look into every culture throughout time. The ones that start to go into this direction where they want to blot out and silence the ones that are carrying forth the truth, it inevitably backfires because the truth is immutable. It's an unstoppable force. It can be mitigated. It can be slowed down. It can be stomped out. It can be silenced temporarily. But it's going to build up. It's going to build up. And even now you're seeing that as people have departed so far from the path of purity and from the path of authentic reality, normalcy, that you're seeing this uprising coming back around, and it's swinging the other direction where people are demanding it, requiring, they want it so bad. They want morality to be restored to the nation. Like, how many of you guys, think about this for a minute. When you used to walk into a store, how many things used to be behind locking doors? I walked into Walmart the other day and was like, how much stuff do they got to put behind locking glass walls? Like, I could not believe how much material was locked up. Silly things, little phone cases, little tiny phone cases. They got their own little armored box around it. You know, as I'm on the shelf just trying to pull down, I tried to pull down a little light. There's like a $20 light, and they're like locked up. You go see a sales associate. I'm like, this is unbelievable. Now I understand the response is because people are not understanding the basics of do not steal. A really important command. Don't steal. Real fundamental basic that used to be enforced heavily. In other parts of the world, listen, you can go to the United Arab Emirates. You can go into there and you will not see thievery in tolerance whatsoever. There are places that deal with stealing on a completely different scale. And you know what? It creates fear. It's a good thing to have the fear of doing something wicked. People need the fear of Yahuwah. They need the reverence of Yahuwah. And that's been blotted out and systemically watered down to where people are like, yeah, you can kind of have this relationship with him. If you know Jesus, that's great. And you know God the Father, that's awesome. You're good to go, son. And it's like, no, the fear of Yahuwah is what gives us wisdom. The fear of him, the reverence of him, is what is so much of our relationship with him is built upon. And that can seem strange and bothersome and uncomfortable to talk about. But the fear of Yahuwah is talked about more than almost any other fear that's discussed. Like, he's constantly calling us back to have the fear of him. And when you have that fear, when you have healthy respect and reverence for him, it changes your behavior, it changes the way you think, it changes the way you act. And it will lead you on a path of life, a path of understanding, a path of wisdom. He literally says, any of you who needs wisdom, call on me, ask me, and I'll give it to you without measure. He will answer you. But the worldly system, as it shifts around, like today, well, like we were reading a couple days ago, we were reading Carl Tykereb's book, The Game of Gods, the war, this re-enchantment of man, this new age that's coming back to where people are reawakening these old gods, these old demons, these old hybrids. They're trying to worship the old gods the way that they did. They're going and looking into, reading about and studying, how did people used to worship Apollo? How did people used to worship Thor? And they're recreating a cultural phenomenon. They're recreating heroes and people that people can bow down and worship and adore. People can sacrifice their time, their energy, their money, their relationships to watch and to revere and to impart from them the secrets that they could learn from their religions. That reawakening is happening because that scientific agnosticism has swung so far away that people cannot deny spiritual realities of experiences in their life, and so they're looking for answers. And that's why as people will float from, okay, maybe the New Age has the answers that I'm desperately seeking, so I can understand how I can commune with my star brothers and how I can have these relationships with these enlightened ones in the Great White Brotherhood. And people are going on these quests in all these directions because they're lost. They're lost sheep that are looking for a path to life, and they'll go anywhere to find it. But as people stir that up and awaken it, what's going to happen is an ever-increasing amount of demonic oppression, demonic possession is going to continue to increase, because when you open these doors up and you allow that other spiritual realm to see you, it's predatory. And every time it gets a chance, it's going to try to devour. It's going to steal, kill, and destroy. That's the preeminent operating power that the kingdom of darkness has, is to consume. Whereas Yahuwah's kingdom gives perpetually. Yeshua came to give life as a ransom, to give to others. And you know what? As that power came upon people, as they began to understand their authority, that power was demonstrated wherever they went. And when you are clothed with the power from on high, when you understand the actual authority that Yeshua has given you to operate on this earth and to be his ambassador, you interact with society in a different way. And you become the one who can set captives free. But also, it makes you a screaming giant red beep, 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 warning danger from that direction guy to the enemy, to the kingdom of darkness. So because of that, you get persecuted in a different way. And we're going to see an example of that in the book of Acts. If you haven't read the book of Acts, y'all, it's stinking savage. It is so fun. The book of Acts is one of the most exciting books in the entire scripture, by and far. And it's like a thriller novel. It's fantastic, especially if you read it through the eyes of somebody who is like actually living there. Like you're actually in the moment and you're like, oh my gosh. There's a reason they don't make Marvel movies out of this, because it would like set captives free. It would like turn the world upside down. There's that passage. We're going to see that. Chapter 17 literally says that. This is the kind of stuff that turns the world upside down. You start giving people actual authority and actual power and dominion to be able to act in it, and with wisdom, man, it can literally turn the world upside down. And they're like, we don't want that. We don't want none of that. We want to turn this world into our own pyramid. All right, chapter 16. Let's get in there, shall we? Let's talk about spiritual prostitution, shall we? All right. And we're going to get some backstory because it's good for you. We're jumping forward in time about, 1,300 years, a ways forward in time. This is after the days of Yeshua's life and his death and his resurrection. And this is the time when the early apostles are going around and they're bearing witness to Yeshua, and they're spreading the gospel of the kingdom to the nations. Okay, Paul is Shaul, as you'll hear him talked about in here. Shaul is one of those who is appointed to go out and do a lot of that. Now you're going to hear in here some sweet stuff. You ready for this? Let's jump in. Sweet. It's actually kind of quiet out there. Killing it. It's great. Chapter 16. And he came to Derbe and Lystra, and see, a certain taught one was there named Timothy, the son of a certain Yahudi woman who believed, but his father was Greek, who was well spoken of by the brothers who were at Lystra and Iconium. Shaul wished to have this one go with him, and he took him and circumcised him, because of the Yahudim who were in those places, for they all knew that his father was Greek. And as they went through the cities, they delivered to them the regulations to keep, which were decided by the emissaries and the elders at Jerusalem. Then indeed the assemblies were strengthened in the belief, and increased in number every day. And having passed through, do you hear that? They were strengthened in their belief and increased in number every day. Man, can we just start praying that every single day? Can some of you just start praying that, laying that down? Just start praying and petitioning the Father. Will you please, Father, strengthen people in their beliefs and increase our numbers every single day? Just start every day, just a diligent prayer. Just a fervent, effective prayers of a righteous man avails much. And if we can start diligently praying that he would strengthen people's beliefs, their convictions, man, it's so good. Aren't you attracted to people that have strong convictions? Even if they're not on my side, I still am genuinely attracted to people who have strong convictions. I have a very different response when I see somebody who's just completely kitted out in satanic garb. For real, I'm like, man, I like to talk to that person. They seem super dedicated. They're very zealous. I love the zealots. I love the freaks. I love them so much. I love those freaky people. You're like, what the heck? They're like covered in savage reptilian tattoos and all kinds of gnarly features and pentagrams. And I'm all like, you look like somebody who's highly motivated individual. And I love to see how motivated you are for what you believe in. That's awesome. That's salty. You know what I'm saying? People like a little salt in their meal. It's disgusting to have soup that's just unsalted. You're like, why? Chelsea looking at this pack of butter the other day and was like, unsalted? Why? Why would anybody want unsalted butter? That's how she sounded in my mind at the time. It's real. You're like, why would you even bother? Salt is so good. And even people that are salty for the other team, I think are fantastic because they have enough conviction. They're strong enough in their belief to be recruiting all the time. They're strong enough to their beliefs to literally augment themselves, permanently shapeshift themselves, permanently disfigure themselves so that they can be a witness to others of what they believe. That's dedication. That's somebody who's a disciple, real life, disciple of their beliefs. But when we look through the rest of the crowd and you're like, why do all the other Christians or believers basically look like everybody else and act like everybody else? Probably because you are just like everybody else. That was our deep stab in the stinking stomach right up into our bleeding arteries of conviction my wife and I had when we were going to this mega church in Colorado. We were the leaders in this college ministry, and we were like looking around, and we were exactly like the world, but we talked about our church a lot. All the time we talked about Flatirons. We talked about Flatirons Community Church all the time and invited people to Flatirons, and you just need to come bump into Jesus. That was their motto. We're creating a good environment to bump into Jesus, and we play secular music at the start of our worship, and then we play a really sick Eminem and Rihanna song at the beginning, and then we play good worship music, and it's like a thunderous rock show. Anyways, it's a production studio environment, and it just created this emotional awesomeness, and you felt great. You're like, this is fantastic and energizing, and I like it. It was very addicting. It didn't start out that way, but it got there. But after a while, we began to realize we are nothing like set apart. That's what holy means. We weren't really holy. We were basically like everybody else. We just talked about Jesus more. And that was super convicting. That was a really convicting moment of realization that we really didn't have the right leaders in our life. We didn't have people that were genuinely pointing us back towards a devoted relationship with the King of Kings. And we needed that more than we needed anything else that we could find there. And so we started seeking it out for ourselves, and we did that a lot through podcasts. That was like our main form of content for years. That was where we'd have it. We'd go hiking, backpacking in the woods in Colorado and listen to sermons of people that were preaching a dangerous gospel, like super intense people that were like talking about dangerous stuff, forsaking everything you have to follow the kingdom, selling everything you have to follow him, actually getting rid of the things in your life that are weighing you down, purging the evil from your midst. Russ Dizdar, remember some of the first times I heard that guy, I was like, holy smokes, this dude is a tyrannically powerful preacher, and he is convicting people on all sides perpetually. And I was like, this is a very powerful man who is calling people to a holiness factor in life that is very needed in my life. And he was talking about charged books and things that you have in your house that are leaving doors open to the enemy to come and occupy your home. And I was like sitting there looking at my wife, and we were staring at our DVD collection. We're like, it's all got to go. It's all got to go. There's some funk in that stuff. It's not all like nasty. There wasn't like nasty stuff, but there's some funk in that. And when you abstain long enough from like looking at extremely violent or sexually explicit things, when you start to actually abstain from any of that, you become so much more sensitive to it, and you don't want anything to do with it in the same way. And it changes you. It changes you. When you take that stuff out of your house and when you begin to purge it from your midst, it creates you're trying to clean your house up, the skunky, funky smell in the bed starts to get aired out. When you open the windows and you start to air out your room every day, no matter what, you air out your room, even if it's 10 degrees outside, give it 10 minutes, get some fresh air in there, purify that place. It's so beneficial. And when you take deliberate steps in your life to cleanse this evil, to purge it from your midst, there is long-term, beautiful, fruitful gains that come from it. But this world doesn't incentivize that. They don't sit you down in school and teach you, hey, these would be some really good things to do for your overall wellness and hygiene. Let's talk about parasite cleansing. 2 to 3 or 4 times a year, what we all need to sit down and do is detoxify our bodies from parasites. If I could have had that in health class, how much suffering would it have saved me? How much of a benefit that would have saved me instead of the filth they showed me on the screen? They're like, this is the education that you're going to get in this class. And you're like, oh, great. What kind of ideas did that put in my head? Instead of talking about parasitic manipulators, they could have been talking to me about parasitic manipulators. They're like, no, none of that. They didn't give you any of that. Why? Because they're demons. Parasites are very much just like demons. For what it's worth, they're sentient. They're like intelligent. Do you think about this? It's just ridiculous. I was sitting there telling my daughters this morning. I'm going to get back to Acts, but I got to talk about flamingos. Flamingos, just for an instance. Parasites, okay? There's this class of parasites that are called parasitic manipulators. A parasite is something that exists, that only exists and survives because it feeds off of something else, a host. Otherwise, it would not be able to live. Parasitic manipulators are things that also, while they are inside of their target animal, species, plant, when they're inside of the human, they can physically manipulate that environment that they're in and augment it to become more conducive for them to live there. But not just that, they can also physically alter the creature itself to change its behavior entirely. One of the most big examples I always like to give you guys is about the one that lives and breeds and multiplies inside of the intestines of cats. Toxoplasmosis, something like that. It's got a longer little hinge to the end of that name. But regardless, it lives and propagates inside of the intestines of a cat. And so when a cat takes a poop and leaves that out, those parasites are all over that thing. Or its eggs, it's little like it's ready to go. So it gets transferred around through that way. This is how people predominantly come into contact with that. You know, it's sitting around on your couch and your sofa, and you get it in your hand, you get it in your eye, you get it in your mouth. It happens. It's like almost 30% of the population, you guys watching this, 1 out of 3 of you sitting here staring at the screen. You're like, do I have this? Yes. Answer yes. Almost a guarantee. 90% of France had it at one point. 9 out of 10. Savage, y'all. Anyways, it's got parasitic mind control, real-life mind control powers inside this thing. So when its main target that the parasite likes to work through, though, is mice. And when it gets infected into the mice, when the mice pick it up and get it eaten, it goes inside their body and begins to start shutting down certain areas of their brain, the reward centers, start augmenting its reward center so that when it smells cat urine, it's actually aroused. It's like interested and wants to be around cat urine, and it craves it, and it incessantly needs it. It turns on cravings and appetites, sexual appetites that it would not have, that shut down its centers of inhibition. So it chases down cats, and it tries to get all up in their business, and the cat eats them. And the parasite then gets propagated once more in the cat's intestines. And on this cycle goes. Well, these riskier behaviors get translated into people as well. And sexually deviant things get translated into people. And their abnormality from feeling fear about things that they should and things that should be avoided, and behaviors, abhorrent behaviors, are not. Instead, they desire them. And so this is where detoxing can physically transform your perspective on the world in a matter of 30 to 40 days, completely have a different lens with which to see the world. Even our daughter Naomi, she had tapeworm that she had picked up when we were on a farm. We did a detox with her, and at the time, I think we just used diatomaceous earth. I gave her some diatomaceous earth up front, and that just started this massive die-off in her, and she was like cratering sick. It was bad. And she was an absolute mess. She got thrush in her mouth, and at the same time, we used this other a guy named Josh Truex has a Modern Roots Life is his website, something like that. Anyways, he has a product that's called Kids Herbal Flush. Herbal Flush is what he calls it. And he has one that's called Kids Flush, which is, it's the same thing, basically, just different dosage. But you take that for 30 days. Don't stop. Take it for 30 days. Helps to cleanse and detoxify parasites and all kinds of toxins that are in your body, heavy metals, that kind of stuff. It's fantastic. Anyways, we'd used it before. And so we started giving her that as well. And she, after a couple weeks of being like in the dumps unwell, just like all the parasites as they die off, they shunt eggs. They shunt eggs and larvae, and they break themselves apart, and they're just like desperately trying to fight for it. They'll start giving you cravings and insane rage, emotions. They can affect your emotions and your hormones, and they'll play on all of that. You don't think about you got little demons inside you controlling the switches of your hormones, but you straight up do, y'all. Like by the billions. It's savage down there. Anyways, as the course of time went on, though, she started to come back to it and was like kind of herself again. And then it was like after about 3 or 4 weeks, she was so much more peaceful, like mellow, chill, just emotionally stable and calm. And we're like, what is this? What is this? She's just so much more able to handle stress and was just so much more peaceful. And it was like this whole new side of Naomi we hadn't seen for a long time. And we're like, oh my gosh, have you just been oppressed with parasites? Some of you, that's literally the answer to prayers that you're trying to figure out what is wrong with me, what is going on with me, what's going on with my children. Some of it, you guys, you would not believe how much of it is parasites as the main causal agents of so much disease and so much mental health issues. This isn't just like the idea of Nathan. Like, this is peer-reviewed research. You guys can go find out for what it's worth. It can just be the opinion of Nathan. You can go test it out for yourself and find out. But people that have schizophrenia and bipolar disorder and depression and chronic severe anxiety and arthritis and all these different tendrils that they're like, oh, go figure. Parasites, people full of parasites. These detoxification things do phenomenal things for helping to restore that to people and give them their soundness of mind back. And you know what? For what it's worth, y'all, something to consider. We do one every couple of years. I like to use diatomaceous earth, bentonite clay, black walnut tincture, and wormwood tincture, and then I do the herbal flush. Those are like my little batteries that I like to do, and it's just fantastic. And you might have all kinds of stuff coming out of you and be funky as a skunk for a while, but I'll tell you what, you'll feel a lot better afterwards. So for what it's worth, I got a little bit sidetracked there when we talked about strengthening and prayers, but it was awesome. Just challenge you guys. Check out Parasitic Manipulators. Type that into your search engine and spend a while watching documentaries on that. You'll never be worse off for it. All right. And having passed through Phrygia and Galatian country, they were forbidden by the set-apart spirit to speak the word in Asia. And when they came to Mysia, they tried to go into Bithynia, but the spirit did not allow them. And having passed by Mysia, they came down to Troas. And in a night, a vision appeared to Shaul. A man of Macedonia, that's Greece, was standing, begging him and saying, come over to Macedonia and help us. And when he saw the vision, immediately we sought to go to Macedonia, concluding that the master had called us to bring the good news to them. Therefore, sailing from Troas, we ran a straight course to Samothrake, and the next day came to Neapolis, and from there to Philippi, which is the principal city of that part of Macedonia, a colony. And we were staying in that city for some days. And on the Sabbath day, we went outside the city by a river, where there used to be prayer. And having sat down, we were speaking to the women who met there. And a certain woman named Lydia, a seller of purple from the city of Thyatira, worshiping Elohim, was hearing, whose heart the master did open to pay attention to what Shaul said. Check this out for a moment. Just remember, whenever you are out there trying to preach out that word or trying to share it with somebody else and trying to reason with them or wrestle with them about the scriptures, it says something beautiful here. It said, whose heart the master did open to pay attention to what Shaul said. As much as we want to put it on ourselves that we are part of this process, and we co-labor with him, it's ultimately Yahuwah who draws people unto himself. It is genuinely Yeshua the master, Jesus the master, who is the one who opens people's heart to be able to understand and pay attention, open their ears to hear, open their eyes to see, give them understanding. That's one of the most critical things to remember, and to take some of that responsibility off yourself. If you're really diligently laboring for others and you're interceding, know that it is also in the Father's good interest to open somebody's heart up and to give them the ability to receive it. Lydia, for those of you that aren't aware here, it says she's a seller of purple. To us, that doesn't mean much. She sold dyes. But back in the day, this type of purple came from the murex shell, snail. The murex snail, I don't have mine on the wall. Nope. It's a small shell of a tiny little snail, and he likes to live in tide pools, which is my favorite place on the entire stinking face of the earth to ever live. I love tide pools. The greatest creations ever been. People are cool too, but tide pools are awesomer. I love tide pools. They're like living aquariums. They're so beautiful, where the rocks create little bowls, and as the tide comes in, water fills up this area, and then as it goes out, it's kind of trapped, and it's like a miniature aquarium, and all kinds of stuff lives there. Anyways, it's in that tidal depths that these murex shells are harvested from, and they would harvest them by the heaps. And they crack open the shells, and they would extract this little gland that's kind of greenish color when you first cut it out, and they would pile those up and then discard all the rest. Well, then they would use that little gland, would create this dye through a crazy process that involved a lot of pee as well. Urea is very common for dyes and extracts. But as they would go through that process, there was this horrific stench, horrific stench. But this process was very laborious to actually harvest and collect enough of these, and then to actually get to where you had the dye itself. And this dye is very unique. There's not any other dye that's like this in the world. When you dye fabric with this, whether it's wool or whether it's linen or silk, when you dye the garment into it, the color is set based off of the type of light that is around it. So if you are exposing it to moonlight, you'll get various different shades of deeper purples and almost reds if you expose it to moonlight when you pull it out, versus if you expose it to full sunlight, versus you expose it to shade light, you'll get different almost blues and greens and neons and purples, kind of the higher spectrum. It's amazing. And when you quench that color, when you quench the color as it's changing, literally in front of your eyes, you pull it out, it'll start to change. And when you quench it in water, it'll set that stain. And that dye will not ever come out of it. It will never fade. It's an incredibly unique dye. That's where you get that blue, kind of that sapphire blue that's in your zeet seats. That's a way of dyeing that color. So that's why there's variance between the shades of it, because given how it was dyed, how the actual dye was set in the fabric, it would change and be a little different. Well, that purple color at times was literally only allowed to be worn by royalty, people that were in the royal court, people that were part of the empirical powers at the time. So it was an extremely valuable and profitable dye, and people that were in this industry had a lot of wealth, had a lot of influence. Lydia is one of those who, up until this point in her life, never received the gospel, never received the kingdom. Her heart was closed off to it. But you know what? This beautiful moment shows up here where they were obedient to a dream that the Father had given them to go and obey and travel to a place they'd never been to, land there, and as they're preaching on the Sabbath, this woman's heart is opened up to receive the gospel of the Scriptures. And it is just this amazing little microcosm of remembrance that the Father has the power to open people's hearts up to hear these things. So this is why when we pray and we intercede for others, understand that's what's kind of doing behind the scenes, that work to try to make a prepared heart to be able to receive the engrafted words that can come to salvation. Check this out. So, and her response afterwards is to be immersed, baptism. And when she was immersed, and her household, so not just her, but her household as well, she begged us, saying, "If you have judged me to be believing in the Master, come to my house and stay." And she urged us. And it came to be, as we went to prayer, that a certain slave girl, possessed with a spirit of Python, did meet us, who brought her masters much profit by her foretelling. This is a super strange little sentence here. To go back in time to the context of this area that they're in, they're standing in a territory that had a temple dedicated to Apollo. This temple to Apollo had presiding over it an oracle of Delphi is often what she's referred to as, the Pythias. Like, she was the woman who was over the age of 50 years old, and she was possessed with the spirit of Python, the spirit of the serpent, the dragon. And Apollo, there's a whole other thing I'm not going to go into about Apollo's history, mythology, and all the rest of that nonsense. But needless to say, people would go there to this woman to try to receive prophecies from her. The prophecies, she would be uttering all kinds of more or less unintelligible words, and people would write this stuff down and tell it to others or explain it to others. So they made her, but she was super powerful, very influential, and had a lot of prestige. Well, this woman here that we're reading about, she is not one of the oracles of Delphi. However, she is possessed by the same spirit that possesses the oracle of Delphi, which allows them to prognosticate and fortune-telling, to tell the future. Well, she was a slave girl who got possessed by this spirit, had otherwise just been a slave girl, but now her masters were prostituting her out because she's possessed by this spirit so that she can make them money. And it said that she made them very much profit. She made them exceedingly rich from all of her fortune telling. So this chick is this slave girl is a slave to this spirit, and she's a slave to the men that are ruling over her. Now understand, she's going to speak out words of proclamation that is eventually going to irritate the heck out of Paul, and he's going to drive this thing out of her. Having followed Shaul and us, she cried out, saying, "These men are the servants of the Most High Elohim, who proclaims to us the way of deliverance." And you'll find this happening all throughout Yeshua's ministry. When he would show up, the Spirit of the Most High was on him so powerfully that demons would immediately present themselves when he would show up in a room. Like, instantaneously show up. And I know sometimes we have this like movie version of what demons look like when they show up and people's eyes are rolling back and they're puking green everywhere and they're all like, ah! But a lot of times it's that person speaking and crying out of their own mouth. But they're saying stuff or talking about things that they don't know anything else. They would not know any information about otherwise. Yeshua, when he would show up, they would literally proclaim he's the son of Elohim. He would proclaim and he would tell them to be silent. He would tell them to be silent and to come out of these people, complete authority, and drive them out of there. This was they're proclaiming his throne, his kingdom, but he didn't want that proclamation to be coming from the demonic. He didn't want them to be the ones ushering it him in. Now, they recognized who he was and his authority and his power and dominion over them and why they had to submit to him and why they had to do that. Whereas this one is following them around, continually proclaiming who these people are, but Saul is tired of it. She was doing this for many days. But Shaul was greatly annoyed and turned and said to the spirit, I command you in the name of Yeshua Messiah to come out of her. And it came out that same hour. Simple deliverance, y'all. This took a few days before it actually took place, but understand, spiritual deliverance and casting out demons can be very, very simple. It doesn't require screaming and jumping around and a bunch of violence of action. It doesn't require making a scene. Generally, the demonic wants the spectacle. They want the scene. They want the audience. They want to jump to somebody else. They want to make a jump to another person and be able to have access to that person. So that's why you also got to be careful about laying hands on people. And when you're doing demonic deliverances and not just casting demons out of anybody hastily. You're not just grabbing onto people. You also don't just do it to anybody just because you can either. You don't see Yeshua casting demons out of every single person everywhere he went all the time. There is a vacuum effect that when we cast out demons from somebody that isn't going to swear their life away or turn away from it and repent, that it's literally demons are going to come back to them and bring 7 worse spirits than they have and fill that person back up. So you got to be very on guard and discerning about, I just don't go randomly casting demons out of every person I meet. Just because I know this person's definitely got some demonic funk in their trunk doesn't mean I'm going to cast it out of them. Unless they also want to repent and be filled with the Holy Spirit, filled with the Ruach HaKodesh. It's not something we just go and do hastily. But understand, what is just taking place here is a demonstration between 2 different kingdoms. And the authority that's demonstrated is now causing a complete, absolute breakdown of a financial power broker. And this is why they hate it when people come out with authority. They don't like people sharing the authority. Listen to this. When her masters saw that their anticipation of money-making was gone, they seized Shaul and Silas and dragged them into the marketplace to the rulers. It's the exact same reaction of pimps that lose the girl they're sending out to John's. It's the exact same reactions that people have when they're losing their star player, and they got it stolen from the other team. But this spirit that left them, this girl finally has freedom. She finally has freedom from this bondage that she has been in. But greediness for gain, man. That's the parasitic infection that these guys had. The parasite and the demonic attachment that these guys had was this greediness for gain, this love of silver that affected them and consumed them to where they're prostituting out their slave to continue to aggrandize and enrich them. But this thing goes bad, y'all. It gets crazy. Check this out. So they seized Paul, Shaul, and Silas and dragged them into the marketplace to the rulers. And having brought them to the captains, they said, "These men, being Yahudim, greatly disturb our city, and they proclaim practices which are not right for us to receive nor to do, being Romans." And the crowd rose up together against them. And the captains tore off their garments and commanded them to be beaten with rods. And having laid many blows upon them, they threw them into the prison, commanding the jailer to keep them safely, who having received such command, put them into the inner prison and fastened their feet in the stocks. And at midnight, Shaul and Silas were praying and singing songs to Elohim, and the prisoners were listening to them. And suddenly a great earthquake took place, so that the foundations of the prison were shaken. And immediately all the doors were opened, and all the chains came loose. And the jailer, awakening from sleep and seeing the prison doors open, thinking the prisoners had fled, drew his sword and was about to kill himself. But Shaul called with a loud voice, saying, "Do no harm to yourself, for we are all here." And asking for a light, he ran in and fell down trembling before Shaul and Silas. And having led them outside, he said, "Masters, what do I have to do to be saved?" And they said, "Believe on the Master Yeshua Messiah, and you shall be saved, you and your household." And they spoke the word of Yahuwah to him and to all who were in his house. And taking them in that hour of the night, he washed their wounds, and immediately he was immersed, he and all that were his. Come on, y'all. How awesome is this? Brutal on one side. They getting their stinking lunch eaten, beaten, mocked. First of all, they get the scourge of public mocking. People are making fun of them. They're dragging them into the courts of public opinion. They're making fun of them and belittling them. And then they're literally getting them falsely thrown in prison, beaten with rods, stripped down, beaten with rods, thrown into prison. And in prison, they're praying and they're worshiping and they're lifting up. They're still doing spiritual warfare, y'all. Every time they pray, it's spiritual warfare. Every time you do worship, it's spiritual warfare. And they are contending against this dark, oppressive forces, because it's not just that spirit that got cast out of that girl, the spirit of Python. When it was cast out of her, in the spiritual realms, what we couldn't see in the physical realms was the upheaval, the uproar of what just took place there, because they're at the epicenter of what is supposed to be their kingdom, their powerful place, the seat of their gods, the seat of the demonic has its temple there. And these two homies should show up unannounced and cast out this spirit that has been making people rich and keeping the whole status quo in order. And they're not happy about it. And so it stirs up, and this is why behind the scenes in the spiritual realm, there's this stirring up of confusion and judgment and hatred and violence that gets stirred up to enact its revenge on Paul and Silas for casting out and performing the deliverance. And this can happen, y'all, where you get persecuted because you're the source, you're the ambassador for deliverance in somebody's life. It's not us that casts the demon out. It's the authority of Yeshua through us that has anything to do with it. But because of that, there can be reprisals. There can be retribution. And some of you, that's what you're dealing with in your life, is retribution from the kingdom of darkness for trying to set captives free, for setting someone free, for being a part of leading somebody to the Messiah. So understand, this is where it's really influenced behind the scenes. It was the act of that spiritual authority being demonstrated in that community and the potential power for that truth to spread, that deliverance to spread and begin to change that community to where it was no longer the stronghold for the spirit of Python, but it became the stronghold for the spirit of the Most High. And that's that spiritual war that's going on behind the scenes that leads to all of these fruits and leads to all these demonstrations of authority. So when they get beaten and thrown into prison, it's like the kingdom of darkness wins around. But then when the literal earth shakes and creation responds and freedom is given to Paul and to all the prisoners, now that message, the gospel message, is spreading. And this is, like I was saying earlier, about persecution spreads the gospel message. It spreads the authentic believers more wildly. The fruits of men get far more readily sweet when they are persecuted. And having brought them into his house, he set food before them, and he rejoiced with all his household, having believed in Elohim. And when day came, the authorities sent the officers, saying, "Let these men go." And the jailer reported these words to Shaul, saying, "The captains have sent to let you go. Now then, come out and go in peace." But Shaul said to them, "They have beaten us publicly, uncondemned, being Romans. They have thrown us into prison, and now do they throw us out secretly? No, indeed. Let them come themselves and bring us out." And the officers reported these words to the authorities, and they were afraid when they heard that they were Romans. So coming out of the prison, they went to Lydia, and seeing the brothers, they encouraged them and went forth. Isn't this awesome, y'all? Keep encouraging each other. Keep encouraging them. Keep encouraged no matter what you guys are going through. I just want to pour out the love on you. Just tell you guys you are loved, you are treasured, you're adored. No matter what you're facing or going through, you can call on the Master to be delivered, to be ransomed from it. I know this can be a very difficult time of year for many, many people. But understand, no matter what you've lost for the sake of the truth that you have found, understand you will gain far more of it than you can even possibly imagine. But as always, I do appreciate you guys spending time with me. It's always good to be here. I love you all so much, and I'm thankful that you come along on this journey with us. Thank you for your encouragement and your support. For you bladesmiths out there, y'all, keep it sharp, keep it deadly. Keep writing that word on your hearts, y'all. Live dangerously every single day of your life, because the days may be evil, but you were born for such a time as this. I love y'all. Talk to you soon.